a lot of what I write is about work and the politics of how work gets done. And the first poem I'd like to read, Cleaning Up History, it was written some time ago, but it does seem appropriate at a time of COVID, at a time when the media and politicians have suddenly discovered the importance of people such as hospital cleaners and care workers. Because if history is any guide, they'll be forgetting them within the next 6 months. It's called Cleaning Up History. I am raising a subscription to erect a statue to the unknown janitor, to the slaves scrubbing blood from the Republic's marbled walls, while Marcus Antonius praises his good friend Caesar. It will be a monument to the rest of us, to those who must follow armed with mops and buckets after the great men of history have tracked their muddy boots across the kitchen floors of our lives. No expense will be spared. This memorial will be stronger than the tantrums of heroes, more durable than the spite of kings. Not even the most sycophantic of scholars will be able to ignore its concrete proof that history itself requires a regular spring cleaning. The next poem I'd like to read is also work-related. It's an elegy. It's an elegy for the logging and fishing communities that once stretched from Ladner to Prince Rupert. And these were communities that were based on what seemed like an infinitely renewable resource, one which systematic economic greed has plundered. It's an elegy for a vanished way of life and for the workers who were once the backbone of this province. Just ask us, we'll tell you. Called Loch Bay Elegy. 3 in the morning, a hard October gale blowing through the strait, and the tourists, the pleasure boaters, the sporties, are all tucked safely in some breakwater's lee, clearing a path for the working water, this coast's arterial blood, log barges, freighters, fish boats and their packers. Standing in the lee of Olabar Point, beside a boomstick washed up on the beach at Loch Bay, I watch navigation lights emerge behind Entrance Island, feel the throbbing of a tug's diesels in the stirrups of my ears as it hauls southeast towards Vancouver Harbour's permanent false dawn. A sea lion barks nearby, so close I can almost taste its stench. And once more I am 21, drunk with the smells, the sounds, the sights, and the stories of a world utterly new to me. A world where high lead whistles summon logs the size of small houses up side hills that only a mountain goat would tackle unpaid. A world where wildcat strikes and blacklists, violent death and crippling injury are not just the stuff of folk song, but threads in the weave of everyday life. The running lights begin to dim, the diesels fade. I turn back along the footpath towards home to light a morning fire from wood we felled, but hauled uphill in the wheelbarrow and split ourselves. Wood from the 5 acres where we've fled, hoping that some trace of that vanished world of our youth still lingers here on one of the islands that gave it birth. For this next poem, you should imagine that you're in the wheelhouse of a 73-foot sailboat at night. It's darkened. All boats traveling at night have all their lights off. It's traveling up to the Blue Line, which is just past Port Renfrew, to fish sockeye. And it's a dark, quiet night, and the Sheringham Lighthouse is already behind you. It's called Night Watch. White foam on a black swell, a new moon and Jordan River astern, nothing but ghosts on the radar. Carefully, cat-like, I bite the nape of your neck, the arch of your throat, then stroll out onto the Dodger to check the running lights again, and Time Sheringham as it winks lasciviously at the American shore. My next poem is also about being up in the middle of the night. It's a poem about insomnia. 2 in the morning. That dead hour, only technically morning, when the deranged din of Lucretian atoms prohibits sleep, and along the inner tracks of one's eyelids, the owls of evil memory flit quietly by in relentless review. And now for this next poem, you have once again to imagine that you're on a 73-foot sailboat, one of a crew of 6, and for the last 3 weeks, you've been sitting on the hook on position. That is, you've been anchored out somewhere in the middle of nowhere, almost a whole day's traveling to get to the nearest village, the nearest place where you can buy grub and go for a beer. And you're sitting there because the skipper thinks that he's got the best spot for when they open the place where you are. And you'll be able to more than make up for the time that you've been sitting there, not a whole lot, and beginning to really wish that the season was over. It's called On Position, Cayucot. Dreams of pine and granite fin silver bright in the Cayucot rain, splash lazily across the closed inlet. Marsh grass sways in a slow current. Geese and crabs nibble on our breakfast scraps, while the dog salmon leap into our glacial dream. In a closed area I bleed. In a closed inlet I watch as pine grows down through granite. In a closed area I dream of geese and deer and Barbara, while a grey sky leaches the color from my arms. In a closed inlet, I watch my fingers erupt, itch, dream of pine and granite, flashing lazily in the Cayucot rain. They dream of an opening, finning silver bright through the rain, closing my season for the balance. I spent some 25 years fishing, seining mostly, salmon seining, but I also spent about 10 years logging. So for a little balance, this is a poem about logging in December at a place that no longer exists. It wasn't too far from Port Alberni. The poem is called Macmillan Bladell Limited, Franklin River Division. After a certain point, all rational thought ceases. There is only the hope that at 1 in the afternoon, this whistle, barely audible in the distance, is the first blast of the ho, 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 ho of slack off. The world is revealed, shrinks to a few square yards of white misery, stumbling, sweating, slipping after the chokers, huddling in the lee of upended roots between turns, numbed fingers lurching over the buttons, which ought to be blowing whistles back to the shrouded yarder, feet wrinkled like old newspaper by sleet enfilading this forsaken mountaintop where only my throat is parched. I notice a small icicle clinging to a broken seedling. Surely a mirage here in this white desert. Still, I bend to drink, delicate maneuver of lips, teeth, and tongue. The sense of loss is crushing, tastes like salt. I mentioned that I've done some professional work as a professional historian, and that I was paid to be one. And I've always been fascinated by history, and I came to write this poem because I was thinking about how Martin Luther might have felt after he'd nailed his 95 Theses to the cathedral door, and or at least so it's rumored, then made his famous statement, "Here I stand, I can do no other." It's called Looser. The some simply feel no fear, for whom peril and strife are a drug, addictive. For the rest of us, courage is a dread feeling of choices exhausted, of standing here trembling because we can do no other. And the next poem I'd kind of like to read is also a poem about wondering what lies behind the scene. In this case, it's looking at a photograph and wondering after a while, but what does the dove think about all this? So this poem is entitled After the Cover Photograph of John Coltrane, His Greatest Years. Yes, I too should like my monument to be nothing more than a photograph such as this, a hand releasing a dove. For as your admiration for this noble gesture gives way to understanding, you begin to notice the terrified eyes, the struggling wings. You can almost see the heart beating furiously as it tries to escape. You begin to wonder how many doves died of their fright before the palm opened. The next poem I'd like to read is the title poem of my book, Disappearing Minglewood Blues. The title is a slightly changed version of a Grateful Dead song title from their first album in 1967. The poem itself is something of a retrospective on my life so far. It's called Disappearing Minglewood Blues. I was born in a death cell, reared in a fox's den, earned my living forging skyhooks, selling chokeholds to the green men. I always greet Aurora sitting on a lotus chair, and when I visit Semele, we go swirling through museum squares. If I hung up my hard hat, you'd scarcely notice that I'd been here. This next poem is also a poem that was written some time ago, but that seems appropriate at a time when people are taking to the streets demanding social change. It's called The World Turned Upside Down. This is an incendiary, a subversive, a chain poem. Each worker who reads it, each typist, each mill worker, each nurse, each carpenter must rework, rewrite this poem, and then pass it on to their nearest fellow worker, or the chain will be broken. It is a hard poem I am asking of you, harder to confront than a foreman screaming, than a bank manager foreclosing. I ask that you write about the 8 hours that are the fulcrum and the curse of your life. As you write, you will notice that the person nearest you, the person who gave you their version of this poem, has left their workstation. The coffee whistle has not sounded, is running towards the manager's office. Nothing has broken down, is putting a match to their poem. It is not dark, the fuses have not blown, and is hurling it through the door. All through your workplace, a warm, sparkling glow is spreading. Over there, a foreman is clambering through the window. Down the aisle, your manager is running shoeless into the street. Their world is on fire, and so far, no one has reached for an extinguisher. The chain is unbroken. And the last poem I should like to read is called Discourse on the Nature of Dragons. Another poem about social change, I'm afraid. It was in part inspired by a poem written by the German communist poet Bertolt Brecht, Die Lösung, the solution, in response to the government's solution in 1950, when in 1953 it introduced a 10% increase in work norms, and the response of the people was a wave of massive strikes. In the poem Die Lösung, Brecht suggests that perhaps the government might find it simpler to dissolve the existing people and elect a new one. So this poem, Discourse on the Nature of Dragons. Hyacinth and crocus are sprouting from the beautiful dragon's eyes. Pine and cedar are growing from the dragon's nostrils. Her tongue laughs with a million voices. Unfortunately, this is not scientific. Possibly it is not even real, since the Holy Writ of the dialectical augurs states that dragons are austere, ascetic. Their speech is blood and fire. Naturally, this unforeseen betrayal enrages the rebel theocracy. They proclaim a socialist republic of flowers, while secretly driving needles into the dragon's eyes. Later, they will announce on the 6 o'clock news that studying the circular flight of buzzards clearly demonstrates that the contradictions in the nature of trees may only be resolved once they become stumps. Committees for language reform spring up spontaneously in every temple. Flowers are arrested and taken into dank cellars to be shot in the back of the neck. Nevertheless, when poets speak of dragons, everyone will know what they mean. The priests will tremble. The hyacinths riot. So, thank you.
Wow.
What a wonderful stuff.